we've talked about the idea of one of my teachers mentioned in his first class that most people are dead by the time they're 24, and he was specifically referring to the habituation to an identity that usually occurs by the time you're about 24, 25 years old, and you become a solid experience of yourself. And that experience can either be oriented towards a group or oriented towards an individual or anything in between. And that's where things get real interesting. You know, it's like we've talked about how both of us in our lives are outliers. We didn't really fit into that mold of being, 100% whatever the culture was. We were outside of it for one reason or another. And both the difficulty of that in feeling not part of the group, but also the beauty of that in being able to look outside and start having a vision that's larger than that small group experience. And therefore us traveling around the world, living in many different places, and, going back to America and talking to friends that have lived in the same, 20 block radius for their whole lives and have never traveled outside of their state, So it's like this incredible shift.
One of the reasons that I bring up that process in Japan specifically is because conversely, when I go back to the States, we began to elucidate talking about our experiences and kind of the cultural makeup that we see in Asia, kind of contrasting it against that baseline. And yet, when I go home, I don't know. Today, I'm not exactly so sure where I sort of fall on my opinion about that spectrum, because people. I mean, there's all kinds of groupisms, within this place that we talk about in terms of its radical individuality, which in one sense is true, and in another sense is kind of a slogan, because those themes or that drumbeat is used to kind of herd people together in parties or on teams,
right.
or in, more traditionally in families, responsibility
Sure.
to family or kith or kin, or region, Southerners or Yankees, or
Right.
all of these kinds of things, so it's always these kind of like interactions and threads that go back and forth. It's like the onions are part of a mosaic.
Absolutely, and a living, changing mosaic.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to try to pin down from the external world what's going on. Although if we look at what that's all about in terms of identity, it's like I use my attachments and my relationship with the outside world to create me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole thing. If I feel comfortable and unified in my cultural experience or my family or whatever, everything's fine. I just kind of float along and go through the process as it is. If I don't, then I'm going to be struggling and maybe looking and questioning in ways that would be radically different than that person that just kind of floats along. And most of us have different times in our lives where we'll have some openings, either a trauma or a positive experience that opens us for a bit.
So you mentioned in the video about the conflict and the strife that we can very clearly see everywhere, around the world and in our own minds even, and just everywhere. That's in terms of the human or the collective, or our onions, our layers, it's very surface, and yet that drama, at least to us, when we observe it, it looks like the whole game. Yeah,
Sure.
the drama, whatever drama we're trapped in, we could be having a civil war, or or deciding what to do in our careers, or arguing with a friend or a spouse, or whatever. But the to be able to recognize that drama is content that has a process underneath it. Yeah, it's far out.
And it's also difficult if I've identified with some aspect of myself and I'm in that identity, I no longer have the ability to really deal with the process. I have to be in a more neutral position where I can reflect. I mean, stop, look, listen, and reflect. I have to have stopped. I have to have looked and seen and opened my eyes. I have to listen to the environment and the situation so that I can take it in and then reflect on it rather than rah rah rah, you're this and I'm that and we're going to fight to the death. I mean, at that point we're totally identified. So it's like that stopping and saying, hey, wait a minute, let's hang out for a little bit. Let's see what's going on. And then, of course, what we do if we're caught in our identity is we blame. Well, you did this, and then you say, well, no, I didn't, or you don't understand, or whatever. But we're still rigidified and we're still over-identified with a posture rather than being in a more neutral place where we can perhaps touch into that unity, that specieshood unity that we're always sharing.
This neutrality and reflection is something that I can take time to do on my own. When you describe this process, since we were talking about group conflict and and sort of the larger drama on like the social level or national or whatever, is that perhaps if somebody hears that, what they'll hear is that I've got to sit down with someone else, so that we can hang out together, which would be great. I mean, we've been looking for this for generations, but even in the absence of that, I can hang out with myself, or I can hang out with the idea of this conflict that I'm having, whatever that level of drama is. And even if no one else is willing to do it with me, the neutrality, the benefit of moving to a neutral space on my own, for my own awareness, that deepening, that growing edge that you talk about, that it's well worth the time.
Well, what our neutrality does is to give us the opportunity to both broaden and deepen the aspects of ourselves, looking at the four streams. I may have an idea of what's going on, and if I sit in a neutral place, I can then say, okay, well, I have an idea. What else do I have? I have a feeling, an emotional quality, what's going on. And that translates into a way of being in the world sensorily. And then there's also some kind of bigger image or way that this ties into a bigger sense of myself. And the neutrality is a doorway to expansion. I mean, that's one of the ways of looking at it.